So a warm welcome to us all together. It's so beautiful to see names and faces, some from Happy Teachers Sangha, some from being on retreat together, some new friends. So I'm very grateful to have this opportunity for this conversation to be shared in circle together. My name is Orla, and I'm joining you from Ireland. And I'm the International Coordinator of Wake Up Schools. So we are privileged today to have two dear teachers who have helped tens of thousands of people over the years, children and teenagers and adults, to come to the practice and to take care of their suffering, to nourish their joy. And we're deeply grateful for these two respected teachers. So the format of this webinar will be that I'll hand over in a moment to Richard and Kyrah, and they will lead us in a meditation and then have a conversation around mindfulness in education, some of Richard's experiences along the way. And we'll have space for questions and responses. So not necessarily answers, but responses that Richard and Kaira can share their wisdom. So if you have any questions, you can please add them to the chat and I'll collate them. And if you want to speak your question out loud, that's perfect too. There's time for that. So it's very beautiful to be here together. And Richard, may I hand over to you to get us started?
Thank you so much, Orla. So I'd like to begin by introducing my friend Kaira Lingo, who's the one who selected that beautiful music. So thank you, Kaira, for so many things, most recently that beautiful song. Kaira Jewel began practicing mindfulness in 1997. And today she teaches Buddhist meditation, secular mindfulness, and compassion internationally. She lived as an ordained nun in Plum Village for 15 years, Thich Nhat Hanh's monastic community in France. And now she is teaching in the Zen lineage and also in the Vipassana tradition at the intersection of racial, climate, and social justice, with a focus on activists, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, artists, educators, families, and youth. She's based in New York. She offers spiritual mentoring to individuals and groups, and she is the author of a forthcoming book, We Were Made for These Times: Skillfully Moving Through Change, Loss, and Disruption. This will be this will be in the chat, the link to this book, to pre-order the book, one of the several different links that you'll find there. So with that said, Joel.
Thank you so much, Richard and Orla. And thank you so much, everyone, for being here. I feel very much at home finding myself with you. And I would also like to introduce Richard, who we are gathered here to hear from. Richard began practicing with Thai in the Plum Village community in 1989 and received Thai's blessing to teach as a Dharma teacher with a special focus on youth in 2001. He taught high school math for 37 years before retiring in 2007, but he only retired from high school teaching. He was very much engaged as a Dharma teacher and continues to be. And for that, we're so grateful. So thank you so much, Richard, for all of your heart and love for this community.
Thank you, sister. So I thought we would begin with a short guided meditation. So settle back into a comfortable position just relax and let your body relax, your shoulders, your face, your neck, and come back to your breathing. And I think I'm going to ask you to invite someone who for you was a very, very special teacher at any age of your life. Could be a teacher, a formal teacher, could be somebody in a spiritual teacher, could be a parent, a grandparent, a relative, your partner, could be a child of yours or a grandchild, or it could be an animal that you learned a great deal from. But pick one and invite this teacher of yours to take residence in your heart for a couple of minutes and just share his or her beautiful energy with you. Have a bell. The wonderful thing about our good teachers is that they will be with us for the rest of our lives. It's not just a class, it's their being that they've given to us. And of course, if we're teachers, we're with our students for the rest of their lives. So it's a very powerful relationship between teacher and student, and so important. I want to thank a few more people. Thanks to Kaira Jewel, thanks to Orla with Wake Up Schools, and also to Faplu and Vapgung, the two monastics who have been very supportive and working with Wake Up Schools since its beginning. And I'm imagining that all of you have been to the Wake Up Schools website, but if you haven't, that will be in the chat. Another important thing in the chat will be the Thich Nhat Hanh Foundation, because if you would like to support these efforts of Thich Nhat Hanh education and in other ways, the foundation is the organization that provides that support, through which that support flows. So when you go, if you want to make a donation, that their website will be in the chat, and you can make a special note if you want your contribution to go specifically to wake up schools. There are a lot of needs these days, of course, because of COVID. So you might want to just support the foundation in general and let them decide where it's most needed. You'll also find the Parallax Press web page for Kara Jewell's forthcoming book. And then there are two pages that you'll find from a British organization called the Mindfulness Initiative, which was set up really by the British government to look into the mindfulness and its importance for the British people. But they're actually doing such amazing work in terms of looking at research and writing reports that it's going to be a tremendous resource for people all over the world, including all of us. They interviewed wake up schools for part of their data gathering, but they interviewed people all over to get information about mindfulness in various settings. So the first website or URL that you'll get is for the launch of an event tomorrow, just one day away. And it's for a series of essays on responding to mindfulness, developing agency in urgent times, a compilation of essays. There are 11 different essays. I haven't seen them because they haven't been released yet, but 2 of the 11 have to do with mindfulness in education. So this is going to be, this is increasingly important, looking at what we can offer to young people in terms of helping them be resilient and have agency in the face of urgent times. The other one that there's a link to is an amazing report that they put out. I think it was also this year, Implementing Mindfulness in Schools, an evidence-based guide. So it's a great resource for sharing mindfulness in its scientific foundations with schools, administrators, and so forth. Then you'll also find one from my website on the book Walking the Teacher's Path with Mindfulness, and with some material from the book and a pretty good feeling for what the book is all about. And if you make it to the end of it, you'll find a publisher's 20% discount, which will be a gift from the publisher and from me. And the last thing that I want to mention that's on the list is a URL for the Mindfulness in Education Network, which I'll mention in the conversation later on. So Orla is putting them in the links in the chat, and they'll stay there. So you don't worry, they'll all be there together. You can copy them at your leisure. So now let me turn it over to Kara Jewell for a question.
Thank you, Richard. So you have written this book of stories, and we know that you are a very good storyteller. And that you wrote in the introduction how the things that stuck with you the most from teachings were the stories that you read. And so we'd love for you to tell us some stories about how you found this path of mindfulness yourself and how it changed you.
Thank you. Well, one of my favorite stories is that I had already found the book, Miracle of Mindfulness, and had started reading it. But when I read the first story of Thai's in that book, it was about how to have unlimited time for yourself. And as soon as I read that story, I thought, I need to bring this book into my math classes and read it to my students, because they will get so much benefit from this. They have so much work and there's so much pressure that having unlimited time for themselves would be the greatest gift I could possibly give them. So every day I would begin math class with a reading from that book. And when I finished, they said they would like another book. So I read The Sun, My Heart, which was it's kind of the sequel. And then the interesting thing is there was still a little more time in the year, so they said one more. So I didn't know what book to choose. I read them The Tao of Pooh. And my students said, we don't like that book. The author is cynical. It's not like the first author. So that was a real teaching from the students. But I was just reading. And I was loving reading, but it was kind of like reading science fiction because I didn't know anybody who lived their life that way. And I didn't know how you would go about living your life that way. But at the end of that year, the seniors went off to do their projects and came back and gave reports. And one of the seniors was going to give a report on his 2 weeks at the Zen Center of Washington, D.C., where he would come every day and meditate and help out. And so I thought, well, here's somebody who actually meditates. He may know something about this other life. So I went to his report to hear him talk about his experience. And he was so gung-ho. He even talked about going up to New York for a weekend of intense sesshin and being hit with a stick. And he was just smiling, and everything was amazing. So then there was a time for question and answers, and one of the students asked him, Chris, I can see that your life has been changed by your experience, that you spend a lot of time sitting on a cushion now that you didn't used to do. But can you tell us any other way in which your life is different? And Chris thought for a minute, and he said, there are many ways that my life has been affected by my mindfulness practice. But most of them are very subtle. It would be difficult to put them into words. But I can tell you that I am less angry. And when I heard that, I thought, this is my teacher, Chris. And I went up to him on my way out and I said, I need to do what you've been doing. I need to begin a meditation practice. So that was the beginning of what led to my involvement with Thai, meeting Thai, and the things that Kaira mentioned. everything else seemed like it was fated. And so I guess I would leave it at that and move on to the next question.
Thank you, Richard.
Well,
shows the power of spiritual friendship and the importance of having other people that inspire us in this way. I think you've been a Chris to many people since then. So I'd also love to ask you to share, you started talking about how you began sharing mindfulness with your students pretty much immediately. As soon as you started to get a taste for how good it was, right away you brought it to your students. But could you share a bit more about how, as you were beginning to walk this path, you began to bring it into your teaching community, into your classrooms, to your students? And also, what effects did you notice? What was the result of sharing mindfulness with your students?
Well, first of all, let me set the stage for this, because the kind of school that I was teaching in is very important. I was not teaching in a public school at that time. My first 3 years had been teaching in the public school in Washington, D.C., and I see one of my former public school students is listening to this. Hi, Carl.
Hi, Richard.
But anyway, so I guess Carl could probably tell you something about the effects of it, but it would be more complicated than the typical story. Because I had, when I was teaching in public school, I knew nothing about this. But as fate would have it, when I left the public school, I got a job at a Quaker school down the street. And I did not know about Quakers, but their form of worship is silent. And it's not completely silent, but in this particular tradition, we would sit, maybe 400 and some high school students, and 70 or 80 teachers would sit in silence in the gymnasium for 40 minutes. And if someone felt inspired to share something to the whole school, the whole high school, he or she would just stand and share a message. So in the early years when I was there, that person was usually a faculty member. And sometimes it was me, because I would feel inspired in that silence occasionally to rise and share something. I didn't know to whom, but it felt like I was supposed to be sharing it. So the students in the school were used to silence in that limited way. It's not, they were required to attend. It wasn't their choice. So it was natural in that setting to begin my classes with a moment of silence. And there was no bell. It was just simply, just asked for us to begin with a moment of silence, just as a way to begin to arrive in my class. And that happened for many years, because when I met Ty and began a practice and helped start a mindfulness community in Washington, D.C., I was not ready to bring the practice into the school. I didn't see an opening for doing that. And my own practice was very young, and I was focusing my attention on my own and developing my own practice. And then there was a new course that was set up that was required for all ninth grade students for one semester, and it had a unit on health. And I went to the teacher who was teaching that course, and I said, can I do one lesson on stress reduction? And she said, oh yeah, for sure, you can do that. So I developed a lesson plan for teaching ninth graders who were in this required course, not by choice, I was going to have them for 45 minutes, and then that was going to be it. So I knew that what I needed to be memorable. So we began by doing an experiment. And the origin of this experiment is that there's a book called Teacher Man by the author of Angelus Ashes, which was a very Frank McCourt, a very well-known book, bestseller. But Teacher Man was a story of his life as a teacher in the New York City public schools. And I learned a very big lesson from reading that book, which is find out what the students are interested in. And that's the skillful way of presenting what it is you're trying to get them to learn. So when I thought about mindfulness, I asked myself, what are the students interested in? Well, Frank McCourt, when he thought about it, the two answers he got figured out were sex and food. So he did a unit on food. And when I thought about it, I added one more thing, which was that these students were interested in themselves. They were trying to figure out who they were. They were 14-year-olds. And what I realized was, even though all of us would sit in silence every Thursday morning for 40 minutes, probably 5% at most of us were actually using that time to pay attention to what was going on in our minds. So the mind was kind of an unknown, unexplored part of ourselves that we didn't know much about. We knew how to use it, but we didn't really know what was happening in it. So I invited these students, most of whom I did not know, to do an experiment with me, which was to close their eyes if they were comfortable, or otherwise just have them open slightly in a darkened room, and for 5 minutes, watch whatever happened in their minds. I compared the mind to a stage where different things would come onto the stage. They would be there for a while, and then they would leave. And we talked about what they might see on the stage, and we ended up with the idea that we would probably see, become aware of feelings, thoughts, sensations from the outer world, other than vision, and internal bodily sensations, so that they were prepared to kind of just notice these things as they came up. And I also asked them whether they thought there could be more than one thing on their stage at the same time. And people generally thought it might be possible, but they weren't sure. And then I asked them whether their stage might be empty for part of the time, and very few people thought that was possible. So we did this experiment and collected the data, and then we moved on to the question of how many of you had negative thoughts or feelings during the 5 minutes. Did you see negative thoughts and feelings? Well, almost everyone had negative thoughts and feelings that came up in that 5 minute time period. And what did they have to do with? Almost all of them had to do with things that hadn't happened yet, the test that was going to happen later in the day or something like that, things that had happened, a problem with a friend or a parent, and then occasionally just a problem with what was happening right in the moment because they weren't liking what they were doing. So it was, easy to go from there to talk about what is the effect of all that of what's going on in your mind on the kind of life you're living, and do you want to start paying more attention to what's going on in your mind? Well, if there are negative things happening in your mind, it might be kind of a downer to be paying attention to them unless there's something you could do about it. So I said, there is something you can do about it. And we all then did a short meditation. Breathing in, I see myself as a flower. Breathing out, I feel fresh. Breathing in, I see myself as a mountain. And so forth, the Plum Village meditation. And so the seed was planted that the mind had a powerful influence on their life, and that there was something that they could do to make the mind more hospitable and more positive in the influence that it might have on their life. And that was the end of the class. And I used to go to the reunions when students would return, and they would talk about, some of them would talk about something I read to them in class from Thich Nhat Hanh, or they would talk about their experience with this freshman studies class on stress reduction. And I was becoming aware that stress reduction was not just a matter of pressures from school, because the whole world was starting to get stressed. And I could see that mindfulness was going to become an extremely important way of coping and doing more than coping with the kind of world that we were moving into, and that I think Kyrah Jules' book is going to be talking about. So the last thing, let me just say about teaching, was that the last 2 years of my teaching, I took another step, and I got permission from school to begin every one of my classes with 5 minutes of practice, of mindfulness practice. And sometimes it was reading a short poem or a story, and sometimes they were from Thai or from other teachers, or they could be a poem about wisdom and intelligence, inner and outer. And then there was also a lot of free writing where the students just wrote and wrote and wrote for 5 minutes and wrote whatever was in their mind. And it was a revolutionary experience for them. And they wrote me at the end of the year to tell me about important breakthroughs or things that they had learned from themselves in the course of doing these meditations. So, let me stop at this point, because I could talk for a great deal longer about any one of these questions. I think you have one more question.
Yes. Yeah. And thank you so much for what you just shared. And I just love how you created a situation where students could learn from their own experience. You set up this very spacious, you gave tools, but ultimately they were observing themselves and learning from themselves. So that's so profound. So the last question I'll ask you is, about your aspirations, your deep wish in sharing mindfulness with educators, which is what you have really been doing very wholeheartedly since you retired, but even before you retired from Sidwell. So what is your aspiration in sharing mindfulness with educators, which I've had the privilege to do with you and will continue to, but especially in this wonderful new book, what are you really hoping educators will come away from a retreat or from reading this book with?
Well, first of all, I want to just acknowledge the fact that not all teachers are in a position to teach mindfulness in their schools. And also that even in schools that have adopted mindfulness programs, there's a definition for mindfulness and what teaching it means that comes with a program. And so I was in the unusual position of being a single teacher who had a mindfulness practice, who could teach, could find skillful ways of sharing mindfulness with students. But the most important ways that I shared the mindfulness with my students, I think, was just in the changes in my own approach to teaching. The fact that I would take time and I would I would ask students to take time in what they were doing. And eventually I began to begin courses by having students eat a single raisin, and they had 5 minutes to eat it. And we talked about how to eat a raisin with full awareness of what was happening. And then I suggested that that's how I wanted them to do their homework. Not to rush through their homework in order to finish the assignment and go on to the next assignment, but to spend 30 or 40 minutes on their homework. And if they didn't finish it, it was more important that the way they did it than how much they did, because it was like eating fast food the way they were doing homework. So I wanted to give teachers a sense of their own agency in terms of what they conveyed to their students. And to do that by telling stories about how I grew as a teacher, which were very particular to me. But each of these stories is followed by 3 or 4 questions for the readers to reflect on, contemplate and reflect on, in terms of how they connect with their own life. And that is what my hope for the book is, that teachers will begin to spend more time reflecting on their own life. Kaira had mentioned that we had taught together before several times. Actually, we will do it again, teachers. And our focus was not on what the teachers should do when they got to their classroom. It was about developing their own mindfulness practice. Because once a teacher has experienced mindfulness and begins to really feel at home with it and know and feel that they're ready to share it, they will find ways to share it that are organic and that work for their students. And so the very first of the 4 parts of this book are about motivation, about motivating students. And the story that I told you about looking at their minds was one way to do it. But there are lots of different ways to do that. It's a little harder to motivate your colleagues to to investigate mindfulness seriously. But there are some skillful ways of doing that. And I wrote a guided kind of an exercise on called Free at Work, which is a way for anyone who works, but in particular teachers, in this case, to do some meditations on their experience of work and the experience of freedom or lack of freedom that they have, and begin to see that most of the barriers to feeling free at work are internal barriers. Those are the big ones. And that if people can begin to practice in a way to reduce them, to have a different relationship to those so-called barriers that are inside of them, then the kind of teaching that they're going to do is going to be greatly effective and much more powerful. So that's what I want teachers to get from the book. And so here we're seeing that it's available in the resource section from the Happy Teacher Sangha page. So anyway, thank you for that question. I'm sure I didn't even begin to answer any of these questions, but we can go for about a half an hour more if people have time. So I'm happy to start answering your questions. And thank you, Kaira Jules, for yours.
Thank you, Richard. Yeah.
So I saw one or two before, but this one about preschool age, mindfulness at preschool age, is important for me to answer. What I'm going to say is that the Mindfulness and Education Network, which you have the URL for, has well over 1,000 members around the world who are involved with education in many different ages, many different subjects, higher education, the arts, using yoga, using all kinds of different approaches. So when I would often get questions, emails from other teachers asking me for advice on how to deal with this problem or that problem or another problem involving mindfulness. And probably 10% of the questions I really could speak to from my own experience. And maybe 10% I would have no clue what to say because it was so different. For example, preschool students. And the other 80%, I could say something, but it might not have been that helpful. So if I knew that I did not have a very helpful response for a question, I would invite the person who wrote me to go to the Mindfulness and Education Network website, join the listserv, and post their question. And it is surprising what kind of wisdom was available to answer questions that I had no idea what the answers might be. And I'll just tell you a very quick story that I had two students who were friends, but they used to kick each other whenever one of them walked by the other one. And I was not used to dealing with discipline in my school. There was a school where discipline problems weren't rare. So I put that problem out onto the listserv and got back a few different answers, but the one that I loved was to acquaint these two students with Aikido, which is a Japanese martial art, but it's based on not resisting the force but letting it pass by. And I explained to these students, both of whom were athletes, that they were giving up their power by responding to their friend. And they ended up agreeing that they would not respond if the other one provoked. And of course, that took all the energy out of provoking. So the problem just dissipated. So that was the kind of response to a disciplinary problem that I would not get from a school counselor or a vice principal or anyone in the administration. But I needed to be able to be in touch with the right people, and I didn't know who they were. So if you join the only problem with the network is that it is English. But I know that we have people on it that are there for friends also who don't speak English. So I wouldn't let that stop. If you have friends who you think might be interested, but they don't speak English, you might even join on their behalf.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Let me see about other questions here.
Yeah, so Gina, who asked the question about preschool, she said thank you and that she appreciates your answer. And Norm has asked if or how you were able to connect mindfulness with maths in your regular teaching.
Okay. Well, I know Carl would be interested in that. Connecting it with math was a challenge for me to figure out what to do because in math, the focus is on getting answers. And so it's very analytic and it's focused on kind of an end point. And mindfulness is about being present in the moment to whatever is there. So sometimes, on occasions, I would run into a problem or a question where it was not obvious what to do, how to proceed with it. And what was important to me was that students learn how to sit with a problem, even though they didn't have an answer to it or didn't have a method to solve it. But just sit with it without feeling that they were going to be penalized if they didn't end up with an answer. In fact, I would ask them, what questions do you have as you look at this problem? What comes to your mind? And so they would sit with it to try to just see what they could ask. There are some very standard questions. There's a famous book called How to Solve It by George Polya, where he presents kind of a framework for asking yourself questions. But I didn't actually want to have students with stock questions, that they could turn to. I wanted them to be able to see that they could just sit with something and have questions occur to them. And I have to admit, this is not an easy transition for students who are used to coming up with answers, but not used to coming up with questions. So I was much more successful in terms of, in the math class, giving students a way to understand themselves better, even if they didn't understand mathematics a lot better right away. And also by doing 5 minutes of mindfulness practice before starting to work. And these students would always work in groups of 4. The focus that they had on working with each other, the attention that they paid, and the quality of the discussion was much higher as a result of the fact that they had settled in, that they had gotten out on paper in their journal the things that were bothering them as they left their last class or whatever. So it had a great benefit on the quality of the math to simply have this time of mindfulness. And on tests, even, we would do 5 minutes of meditation before taking the test. The first half of that meditation was to focus on how you were feeling and what you were thinking as you went into the test. And of course, there were a lot of students who were not feeling very comfortable, very confident. And I wanted to give them the message that there's nothing wrong with feeling those ways. They could be completely understandable in light of how the amount of studying they've done or how they did on the last test, but that it's okay. It's not something that needs to take over your life for the next 45 minutes. But then we would turn our attention to something that we had done with math at some point in our life that we felt proud of, that we felt happy about. I said, it could be when you learn to count to 10. That's fine. Just go to some place that you felt good about it, close your eyes, and sit with that feeling, knowing that you have in you very positive experiences with math, and that they're there even if there's also feelings right now in this moment of concern. And if you are taking this test and you reach a point where you start to blank out or something like that, just close your eyes and go back to that moment that you had thought of earlier, where you felt very happy with mathematics and your relationship to it. So that's what I can say about math.
Thank you so much, Richard. It's very skillful resourcing, so practical for a student. And we've had a question about from a teacher who teaches at a school where kind of doing more is one of the core values of the school. So the result is that it's created a culture that's competitive and stressful. So this is a question maybe for you or for Kyrah. If there are any examples of motivating students or even teachers on ways to slow down and become more mindful.
Teachers. The answer that I would give is that having, for students, was having students work together is the most powerful antidote to competition. And when they would work together for a unit, and then at the end of the unit, I would ask them to write thank you notes to each of the other students in their group. And this ritual became so important that if for some reason I forgot to ask them to write thank you notes, somebody would remind me, hey, we haven't written our thank you notes, Mr. Brady. So in terms of teachers, of course, when we're talking about teachers have had the habits of competition themselves and looking good and achievement for so much longer than students have in most cases, that it's a much more difficult problem for teachers. And I think that for teachers, I would begin by having them look at what is going on in them, and to do it with understanding and acceptance, because not accepting what is the beginning of failure. And we have to start with what is and accept the fact that there are reasons why teachers are the way that they are. And that as far as they're concerned, in many cases, they're very good reasons. And that I think that maybe finding I don't know, Kaira Jewel may have some ideas about this, but finding some good stories about competition and about togetherness, Thich Nhat Hanh would say interbeing, or finding a poem. It's interesting. Some of you may be familiar with Thich Nhat Hanh's poem, Please Call Me By My True Names. All the characters that you have in your school, both all of the faculty members and all of the students, are your true names, in addition to the ones that you normally call yourself. And so I think it could be, that the ultimate goal would be to have everyone understand that they are not a separate person that is cut off from everyone else, that they're part of something that is much larger, and that although they may see that it's difficult to do that, that is also true. That is also part of the truth. And so if some of their students are suffering because they are not doing well, and they're feeling that they can't make the grade because the competition is too great, then it is also part of that teacher suffering, whether they're willing to be in touch with it or not. And so it would be good to just raise the consciousness of the faculty towards what are the students feeling, and is it it's just something that we want to look at. Can we feel their own suffering in us? This would be kind of a general approach. So I don't know, Kaira Jewel, do you have any experience or thoughts that you'd like to add, please?
Sure. Thank you, Richard. That was already very rich. I just want to emphasize what you began sharing about the importance of acknowledging one another and appreciating one another. I think that can go a long way to shifting a culture of externalizing our success in terms of what we accomplish and the competition that feeds. And just one story with kids and one story with adults, with teachers. So we were invited to share at the Dharma school in the UK in, I'm forgetting the name of the town. That's a bit south of London. And when I arrived in one of the classrooms, there was a 11-year-old boy who, there had been monastics there at the beginning of the year, and we were there midway through the year. And he went to his locker and very carefully took out a piece of paper that was very well preserved for 6 months. And he opened it up. It was a flower image where there was a big circle in the middle with the name of the child, and then petals all around the flower center with things that the other students had written inside that petal that they appreciated about him in this case, because this was an activity that the monastics had done with their class at the beginning of the year. So he took it out like it was the most precious treasure, and he showed it to me, and he said, "Are we going to get to do this again?" And I could see how much that impacted him to have his peers reflect on what his good qualities were. And he got to do that for each. You pass the papers. So you give everyone a piece. They put their name in the central circle, and then they pass and keep passing until they get their circle. They get their piece of paper back with every single student's writing about what they care about in them, what they appreciate about in them. And we did the beginning anew. This is a Plum Village practice of basically the main thing we did was the first step of expressing our appreciation. We call it watering the flower. We did that in the afternoon with the teachers and the staff. And very simple. Flowers, something inspiring, something beautiful, refreshing in the center. And then whoever wishes has a chance to share anything about one person, about the whole group, what they appreciate about the people that they work with. And all of us came in tired because we'd been teaching all day. They'd been working all day. Many people said, I feel so much energy at the end, just hearing appreciations shared, not even about oneself, but even about another person. It's like the sprinkler in the garden waters all the plants. So everyone left feeling quite motivated and seeing more clearly the gift of their community. So those kinds of practices, whether in the classroom or among the teachers and staff, I think can really support seeing each other, really seeing each other, rather than, oh, what have they got? What have they done? You know, judging, you know, kind of comparing ourselves and that competitive energy.
Thank you.
Thank you both so much. So they were the questions in the chat so far. So maybe we can open it up to the group. If anyone would like to ask a question or has a reflection or an experience that's been touched on in terms of flower watering or offering reminders to each other to slow down and be present and see each other, you're very welcome to share. And you can simply, you can either make a signal and I can help to unmute, or you can unmute yourself. Everyone has the power.
I'm just posting in the chat something from Solange that came directly to me. I'm just letting it come to everyone.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Solange. Good to see you. Let me just share one thing about sharing mindfulness with another colleague, with a colleague. I had a colleague for a number of years who was always overburdened and complaining about the amount of work that she had to do as a teacher and on committees and so forth. And it was actually, if I would go into the faculty room and see that she was there, I would leave because the energy was not very positive. Well, one year, and as at the beginning of school, before the first classes had been held, the principal of the high school had a meeting with all of the new teachers, and I was far from a new teacher, but I decided I would go to see what was being told to the new teachers. So at a certain point, the principal said to the teachers, you know, one of the best ways to get to know students is to become an assistant coach of a sports team or to sponsor a club, you know, because then you get to know the students in a very different way than as a classroom teacher. So at the end of the principal's presentation, I asked if I could say a few words to the teachers, and principal made a mistake and said yes. So I said, you know, some of you are completely new as teachers. Some others of you are coming from other teaching jobs. But no matter what, your first year at this school is going to be a very challenging year. It'll have a steep learning curve. And you have been hired to do a very good job of teaching the subject that you're teaching. And I would be very careful about making commitments to things that you're not required to do in this first year, because you want to make sure that you give yourself the time to do the best job you can with the students that you're assigned to teach. So then the meeting ended and we went out into the hall, and this colleague of mine came up to me immediately and she said, Richard, it was so wise of you to tell the new teachers what you just told them, because there really is way too much work being given to the teachers here. And it's, they should begin with the idea that they're going to guard their time and use it wisely, or they'll get into trouble. So when she said this, given her history, and I immediately had this idea, and I said, I feel the same way about the amount of work. And it just occurs to me that you and I can help each other this year, because we have a problem just stopping and relaxing because we're always running around. So how does this sound? Whenever you and I see each other, no matter where we are, no matter where we're going or what we're doing, we will stop. We will look at each other, and we will smile to each other. And as we do that, we will breathe in and out 3 times. She said, I think that's a great idea. I'd like to try that. So for 1 year, we did exactly that for the whole year. Some days we'd see each other a couple of times. Some days we'd never see each other. It didn't matter. But we were there for each other in that way. And at the end of the year, she said to me, that was such an amazing experience. I feel different this year. This year was a different year for me. And how did you get that idea? So I said, well, I'll have to tell you, the truth here. I said, I practice mindfulness in a tradition that uses a bell. And that bell is used. When we hear the bell, whatever we're doing, we stop and we breathe and come back to ourselves and we smile. So I realized that you and I could be bells of mindfulness for each other. And she said, I'd like to know more about that tradition. And so I told her how she could find the mindfulness practice center near her. The couple that were the teachers at that practice center just happened to be Thich Nhat Hanh's niece and her husband. And so before long, she was starting to show up at Days of Mindfulness, and I would find her and sometimes her husband and even maybe one of her children at a retreat. So, so here's the but, big but. In the following fall, I shared with the whole faculty what we had done, because we began with the Quaker style meeting for worship. And so I just stood up and I said that this has been such a powerful experience the year before, and I recommended it for others to try with another friend of theirs. And nobody else did it, because it was the fact that I had the practice and I was offering not just the practice, but also my experience of the practice, so it was all in that communication. So, I don't know, it doesn't scale up, is what I'm trying to say, but there's probably something in there that could be used as an idea of, it's also part of the Plum Village practice to have second body practice, where that Kyrah Jewel can tell you a great deal about. That's kind of part that comes to my mind. So it maybe could be used in schools. I don't know whether you've ever seen anything like that, Kyrah Jewel.
Thank you, Richard. I'm not having something come to mind about second bodies, except with young people, with students. But I do know of a teacher in Germany who did similar to what you described. She got a group of teachers who was interested in mindfulness. They all put some aspect of their daily life on little pieces of paper, and then they put that in a jar. And each day, or maybe it was for each week, they would pick out one. Maybe it was closing the door mindfully, or grading mindfully, or I know a teacher who uses lamps she brings from her own home to have more ambient lighting. She would turn them on in mindfulness at the beginning of the day, turn them on. So whatever it was they wanted to bring more mindfulness to, that was on a little sheet of paper. Beginning of the week, they would pick one, and all of them would do that mindfulness activity for the week. So they were like second bodies to each other for the whole year. And they met every week for a mindful lunch once a week. And they could talk sort of as towards the end of the week, they would share what their practice in school had been like of bringing mindfulness into their writing on the chalkboard or washing their hands in the bathroom. So that's kind of a group second body experience.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'm going to need to head out. Yeah. So I will just express my deep gratitude to you, Richard, to Orla, to our whole Wake Up Schools community here. And thank you so much for inviting me to join you.
Thank you so much, Kaira Jewel. Really, I'm looking forward to our next opportunity already.
Me too. Goodbye, everyone.
Yeah. And I would like to close with just one final story. And this is a story from Plum Village. When so Wake Up Schools was born in Plum Village, and I don't know, started off as applied ethics around 2012, 2010 maybe. But when I started going to Plum Village as a school teacher, long before that, I would try to set up a time during when there was nothing else scheduled for teachers to meet. And just like we're meeting today, to sit in a circle and talk about what kind of school they were teaching in, and if they were using mindfulness in any way, to share that with each other. And I remember very clearly a professor telling us that he had been deeply moved by the way Thich Nhat Hanh erases the whiteboard when he is giving a talk. And if you have ever seen Thich Nhat Hanh live, you know what I'm talking about. But even if you are watching videos of him, if they show him erasing something because he wants to put up a whole new set of terms or something like that, he has the eraser or the cloth, whatever, in his hand, and he moves ever so slowly, like his hand is almost doing a waltz as it goes back and forth and erasing these words. And it is such a profound thing to simply watch him erase the board. And so this professor said, I decided that when my students came into my lecture hall, I would erase the board as they were coming in, and I would be erasing the board from the previous lecture that somebody else had given. And I would be doing it in that manner, and I would say nothing. I would just be erasing the board. And then when I finished doing it, I would turn and I would begin the class. So the students would come in and they would see me doing that, and they would fall silent because this was not something that they were used to. They were used to a professor who was in a hurry, wanted to say as much as possible, and was paying no attention to what he was doing or she was doing while they were raising the board, because they were already moving on in their head to what they were going to be sharing with the students. And he said it made a profound impression on the students in terms of the quality of their attention to what followed in his class. So this is not something that took a great deal of time on his part, but it had a tremendous amount of impact on his students. And I'm sure that those students remember the beginning of those classes. They may have forgotten everything that this professor said, but they remembered the beginning of those classes for years and years. So I just want to leave you all with that thought that even very small things that you do can have a profound and lasting impact on students. So I wish you a lot of luck, and not really luck. You won't need luck. You just I wish you a lot of mindfulness. I would love to hear from you. And I guess the one thing I didn't, there is the URL for my website, and you can contact me through the website. So that would be fine if you would like to share anything with me personally. I'm happy to get more responses. So thank you all for tuning in. And if you, I hope some of you will take a look at the book that is filled with stories. The reason I wrote a book of stories is because as a teacher, I know just how much time we have to read for fun or for our own edification. We have so much to do. So I thought what we need is short stories that we can sit with and just kind of carry, and hopefully even have a little time to reflect on the questions, the reflections and the contemplations at the end of the story. It would be a great book to read together with other teachers, and to share reflections with other teachers. So even one other teacher, two other teachers.
Richard, you may have just founded a Happy Teachers Book Club.
A Happy Teachers Book Club. Yes.
And it just happened.
And the best advertisement is the smile on your face. Of course, if you don't have a smile on your face at school, people will say, "You do what? What has it gotten you?" You're spending this time, and but there's no payoff for it, because they're looking for the payoff. They don't know about the inner smile. So that's the place to begin anyway.
Beautiful. Richard, thank you so much for this kaleidoscope of riches you've offered us this evening. And I'm very grateful for all who have joined in so many different time zones. I know for many it's very late in the evening or early in the morning, and we're so grateful for your presence. Richard, would you like to end with the sound of the bell for us? And then we can unmute for a messy Zoom goodbye.
Yes, I'd be happy to.
Yes, thank you.